At a crowded bus terminal in Chicago, a broken watch worn by a lonely billionaire brings him face to face with a 12-year-old street boy and his younger brother, just 4 years old. What starts as a simple attempt to fix a timepiece unfolds into a life-altering moment, one that reignites forgotten purpose, uncovers old wounds, and begins an unexpected journey toward redemption. Before we begin, leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to say hello. Now, let's dive into the story. The city of Chicago buzzed under a cloudy sky, its towering glass buildings standing tall like silent observers of the millions of lives moving beneath them. Among those lives was Grant Whitaker, 42 years old, sitting quietly in a nearly empty bus terminal. A man worth over $9 billion. Grant didn't look the part today. Unshaven, wrapped in an ordinary coat that gave no hint of wealth or influence. He sat alone, not hiding from journalists, not avoiding his board, not escaping some scandal. He was running from something deeper, a hollow silence inside him. It had been exactly a year since he lost Hannah, his wife of 15 years. One drunk driver, one rainy night, one phone call that shattered everything. Since that call, Grant had disappeared from the world. His assistants had given excuses on his behalf. His company kept running, like a machine. But Grant himself? He had stopped living the moment. Hannah's heart stopped beating. Today was the first time in months that he'd left his penthouse. No chauffeur, no itinerary. He drove his black Escalade himself, parked it 3 blocks away, and walked without a destination. All he knew was that he needed to move. The waiting area at platform 12 felt like time had paused. Rows of old, faded blue seats were half-filled, some people glued to their phones, others staring into nothing. At the far end, Grant sat slouched. His shoulders sagged, his coat hung open, and his tie was barely holding on around his neck. Every few minutes, the automatic doors let in a sharp gust of November air, making the space feel even colder, like a reminder that Grant didn't quite belong here. And yet, that was the very reason he came. After years of flying private, riding in luxury cars, and walking with security, Grant had chosen anonymity. Maybe it was a step backward, or maybe, somehow, a step forward. Even he couldn't tell anymore. He insisted on traveling alone by bus, invisible in a crowd. What was the point of a penthouse or a fleet of Teslas when every room in your home whispered echoes of laughter that had long vanished? He looked down at his wrist, lifting the antique Breguet watch Hannah had once gifted him. It was one of the last things she'd given him before cancer claimed her. Usually precise down to the second, the watch's minute hand had frozen again. Grant sighed and twisted the crown gently, trying to reset it. But the hand didn't move. The stillness of the watch felt like a reflection of his life, luxurious, beautiful, and completely stuck. He let out a short, bitter chuckle. Figures, he muttered under his breath. The one thing in his life that had always worked, that always gave him a sense of control, was failing now. Maybe it wasn't just the watch that was broken. Maybe he was too. The terminal was filled with the low murmur of announcements and the sound of suitcase wheels scraping across concrete. But Grant barely noticed. All he could hear was the silence where the ticking should have been. For a brief moment, he thought about smashing the watch against the ground. That would be dramatic, wouldn't it? Make a scene. Let the world see what grief looked like on a man with $1 billion in his bank account. The cold from the concrete beneath his polished shoes crept up through his body as a storm of thoughts circled inside his head. Why had he come here? A man like him had no reason to be waiting for a late-night bus in a rundown terminal, but part of him needed to escape. Escape the silence of the penthouse, the emptiness of boardrooms, the echo of wealth with no warmth. Then a voice interrupted his downward spiral, small, steady, and strangely confident. "Sir, your watch isn't ticking right." Grant blinked. The voice had come from near his feet, He looked down and was surprised to see a boy, maybe 12, standing beside him and staring up with sharp, observant eyes. The boy's brown hair was messy and curled around his ears, and his face carried the grime of days without a wash. His jeans were ripped at the knees, and he wore an oversized hoodie with frayed sleeves hanging off one shoulder. But what caught Grant's eye more than anything was the little boy beside him, clutching the older boy's hoodie like a lifeline. He was maybe 4, with the same brown curls, only more tangled. He looked like he hadn't had a real meal in days. No coat, just a thin, short-sleeved t-shirt clinging to his tiny frame in the cold. Grant hesitated. "You fix watches?" he asked, part curious, part amused. The older boy nodded quickly. "Yeah, I fixed all kinds pocket watches, old ones, battery ones. My uncle taught me. That was before we ended up out here." The boy pointed to the one backpack hanging from his shoulder. From it, he pulled out a small, battered leather pouch. Inside was a tiny set of tools, rusty but organized with care. He held up a scratched magnifying glass and a flathead screwdriver missing its grip. "What's your name?" Grant asked, and now more intrigued than anything else. "I'm Max," the boy said, "and this is my little brother, Eli. Don't worry, he's quiet. Just cold." Eli didn't say anything. He pressed close to Max, looking at Grant with wide, uncertain eyes, trying to figure out if this man in a suit was a friend or a threat. His small cheeks were red from the cold, but there was a fragile trust in his eyes that made something inside Grant soften. "You sure you can fix it?" he asked, offering the watch. Max's face lit up like someone had just handed him a gold medal. "Yes, sir. Won't even take long." Max knelt down and gently wrapped his tattered hoodie around Eli's shoulders. "Hang on, okay? I'll be quick." Grant let out a long breath. "All right," he said quietly, handing over the watch. "But be careful. It's important to me." Max gave a small nod, not cocky, just sincere. He sat cross-legged on the cold platform floor, placing Eli beside him. From his old bag, he pulled out the tiny pouch of tools again. A bent screwdriver, a cracked magnifying glass, a folded piece of cloth that looked like it came from an old curtain. Grant leaned back into the bench and watched silently. The boy's fingers moved quickly, skillfully, as he opened the back of the watch and adjusted the gears with practiced ease. Eli leaned on Max's shoulder, his eyes growing heavy, trusting him completely. A lump rose in Grant's throat, catching him off guard. When was the last time he'd seen loyalty like that? A bond not built on comfort, but on survival. He looked around. The terminal was still only half full. People moved slowly. Time dragged. But in Max's hands, Grant's watch, and his world began to move again. Grant sat quietly as Max worked over the antique timepiece. His knees bent, elbows resting on his thighs. His small, rough hands moved with such purpose and grace that it was hard to believe. This boy was just 12, with a cracked magnifying lens over one eye and a rusted tool in his fingers. Max focused with intense precision. The noise of the terminal swirled around them, announcements, footsteps, the growl of arriving buses. But for Grant, all of it disappeared beneath the soft clicks of metal being coaxed back to life. A few feet away, the smaller boy toddled over and plopped down beside Max. His clothes were worn, his sleeves dragging across the ground. He had dark curls like his brother and big hazel eyes filled with curiosity. He looked up at Grant, then leaned against Max's side. "I'm tired," he murmured without looking up. Max pulled him close with one arm. "Just rest here, Eli. I'm almost done," he whispered. Grant blinked, trying to steady the feeling in his chest. He hadn't even noticed the second boy at first. Eli looked far too young to be sleeping on hard benches, too small to be walking city streets with only a brother to keep him safe. But here they were so out of place. So fragile. He watched Max again. His fingers were smudged with grease, but they worked confidently, as if this was the only life he'd known repairing broken things, because no one else would dot at 12. Max could fix a $1,000 watch dot at 12. Grant had been driven to tennis practice in a tailored school uniform. What about school? Grant asked quietly. Max shrugged, his eyes still on the watch. Can't go. Gotta take care of Eli. Someone has to. There was no anger in his voice, no sadness, just quiet acceptance, like the weight of the world was just something he had to carry, like Eli's head on his shoulder, like the screwdriver in his hand, like the watch stuck in time. Grant's gaze drifted as Max continued to work, the faint tapping of tools, the only sound between them. Then something else caught his attention. Just a few feet away, on a wooden bench, a small child lay curled up, his tiny frame nearly swallowed by a Navy HOODIE dot. It wasn't just any hoodie, it was Max's. Grant recognized it instantly. The same worn sleeves he'd seen when Max first opened his tool pouch, the boy's watch still in Max's hands. Grant nodded toward the bench. Is that your brother? He asked gently, Max didn't glance up. Yeah, that's I. He's 4. We've been walking since sunrise. His feet were hurting, so I told him to rest. He said it like it was normal, like exhaustion was part of the daily routine. Eli's little legs dangled off the bench. His head rested on the wood, lips slightly parted in sleep. His curls stuck to his forehead with sweat. Dry dirt clung to his cheek. Even with all the noise in the terminal, he didn't stir. His arms were wrapped tightly around his stomach, as if protecting himself in his dreams. Grant turned back to Max, who was now tightening a tiny screw on the watch's side with the same. Focus calm. You're watching over him, Grant said quietly. Max gave a brief nod. Always. He gets nervous in crowds. But he won't sleep unless I'm close. He glanced up, his eyes tired but clear. He doesn't remember Mom. She died when he was little. I tell him stories so he doesn't forget her face. Grant said. Nothing. Max looked back down at the gears. He doesn't know how hard things are. I keep it that way. I want him to think we're just on a big adventure. And that was too much. Something caught in Grant's throat as he looked back at Illy. This tiny boy asleep on a bench in a hoodie too big, depending on a brother far too young to carry such a burden. Grant knew grief. He buried a wife, but this wasn't just loss. This was injustice. 2 children, unseen by the world, surviving with nothing but each other, and the distant hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might finally see them. And in that moment, Grant did. He looked at the boys, at the difference in their ages, and the deep, unmistakable resemblance between them. You take care of him, Grant said. Always, Max said, his voice suddenly stronger. There's no one else. Grant's eyebrows drew together. Where are your parents? Max shifted, clearly uncomfortable. His fingers gripped the small screwdriver he had just set down. Our mom died when Eli was just a baby. Pneumonia. He paused. We stayed with our aunt for a while after that. She said she'd take care of us, but... He stopped, jaw tightening. Grant waited patiently, his voice soft. But... Max inhaled deeply. She only wanted the money. Some kind of government support or something? When that stopped, so did her patience. One night she told me to take Eli and leave. Said we were just extra mouths. He shrugged like it was normal. I packed what I could carry in my bag, and we left. What? About your father? Grant asked, his tone careful. He didn't stay? Max's hands paused. His eyes drifted toward Eli, who was dozing on the bench. Then, without a word, he turned back to the watch and kept working. He left a few months after Mom died. Said he was going to work out of town. Promised he'd be back in a year. Max's voice dropped. But it's been years. He never came back. The words hit Grant like a gust of icy wind. He stared at the boy, stunned by the way Max shared his abandonment like it was just another fact of life routine. Like brushing your teeth or tying your shoes. "You've been on your own all this time?" Grant asked, barely believing it. Max nodded again. "It's been about 3 months, I think. We move around a lot. I fix stuff for people's phones, radios, old watches. Anything with wires or gears. I learned from my uncle before he got arrested. He wasn't the best person, but he taught me things." Grant said nothing. Sitting in front of him was a 12-year-old boy who had lived through more than most grown men. Yet there he was cleaning his little brother's face with a crumpled napkin from his backpack, offering him water from a reused plastic bottle, and somehow still managing to fix a stranger's watch for nothing in return. "Do you go to school?" Grant asked, already knowing the answer. Max shook his head. "We tried once, but they asked for documents. I couldn't lie fast enough. I got scared they'd take Eli away." He looked up then, his voice steady but firm. "He needs me." That last line didn't come out as a complaint. It sounded like a vow. A 12-year-old acting as parent, protector, and provider. Grant turned to Eli, who had now curled up tighter on the bench, his head resting against Max's backpack. He wasn't complaining. He wasn't crying. He just lay there, trusting Max with everything he had. "That's a lot for someone your age," Grant said, gently. Max shrugged. "We all carry things. Some of us just don't get to put them down." There was no bitterness in his tone, just truth. And that unsettled Grant more than any anger ever could. In that moment, Grant realized something terrifying. Max wasn't waiting to be saved. He wasn't hoping someone would come along. He'd already given up on the idea of safety nets. Even more surprising, Max never once asked for help. No begging. No manipulation. No emotional appeal. Just the truth. Clear, raw, and honest. "Do you sleep here?" Grant asked, unable to hold the question, and Max hesitated. "Sometimes. Sometimes we find shelters that let us stay the night. But not always. Some of them don't like older kids bringing younger ones. They think we cause trouble." Grant leaned back in the seat, a heavy ache in his chest at the thought of these two boys wandering unwanted. Surviving on scraps and stubbornness shook something loose inside him. For the first time in over a year since Hannah's funeral, since the silence in his mansion grew unbearable, Grant Whitaker felt something stir. He wasn't sure yet what he was going to do, but something had shifted. In his hands, the old watch suddenly felt heavier. He turned it over slowly, running his thumb along the familiar engraving on the back, faint beneath a layer of grime. "Hannah. Forever is still too short." That line used to make him smile. Now it just ached. "Here," Max said, softly offering the watch back. His small fingers were smudged with grease, the screwdriver tucked neatly into his backpack like a prized treasure. "Try it now." Grant raised the watch to his ear. Click. Tick. Click. The second hand moved soft, smooth, alive. He blinked. It had been over a year since the watch had worked properly. Not since before Hannah died. "You fixed it," Grant whispered. Max stood and dusted off his knees. It wasn't that broken. It just needed someone to care enough to look inside. That line landed deeper than Grant expected. He stared at the boy-worn hoodie, patched sneakers, dirt on his cheeks, and saw someone far older than his age. From behind Max, a small hand tugged at his hoodie. A tiny boy peeked out, no older than 4, with messy brown curls and a t-shirt hanging off his frail frame. He looked up at Grant with weary eyes, but said nothing. Grant gave him a soft nod. "Hi, Eli." The boy didn't speak, just clung tighter to Max. "He's hungry," Max admitted, his voice low like it was hard to say aloud. "But I didn't want to bother you." "You didn't bother me," Grant said gently. "You helped me." Max smiled, just a little, but the tiredness behind his eyes was unmistakable. A weight Grant recognized all too well. Most people wouldn't trust a kid like me with something like that, Max said, nodding toward the watch. It meant something that you did. Grant looked puzzled. Damn, why won't you take the money? I told you, Max said, straightening his back. You already paid me. You trusted me. That matters. Grant held out a crisp $100 bill again. Still, take it. You earned it. Max shook his head again, more firmly this time. If I take more than I earn, I'm no different than the people who used us. That's not who I want to be. The sincerity in his voice knocked the air from Grant's lungs in one moment. This child reminded him of who he used to be, before the money, before the losses, before the silence. A gust of wind swept through the terminal, lifting Eli's hair. The little boy shivered. Instinctively, Max wrapped an arm around him. The gesture was automatic, wordless. But Grant saw it, how Max seemed to grow taller in that moment. Like a shield of pure will. Grant looked down at the watch on his wrist. The ticking was gentle, but steady, like a heartbeat coming back. You brought this back to life, he said softly. Max raised an eyebrow. The watch? Grant shook his head. Something more. For the first time in months, something awakened in his chest, something that felt like breath, like meaning. He looked from Max to Eli. Let me buy you both something hot to eat. Max's shoulders relaxed a bit, but he didn't answer immediately. I'm not offering anything else, Grant said. Just a meal. Is that okay? Max finally nodded. Yeah, okay. But I get to choose what Eli eats. Grant smiled. Deal. And for the first time in a very long while, time didn't just start again. It moved forward. Not just in the watch, but inside him. The bell above the diner door chimed as Grant Whitaker held it open. Max walked in slowly, Eli clutching his hand. The little boy's oversized hoodie nearly swallowed him whole, and his small feet dragged like he hadn't rested in days. The scent of bacon and warm bread filled the air, wrapping around the brothers like a soft embrace. Max paused just inside the doorway. Are you sure this is okay? He asked, voice low, eyes lifting to Grant. Grant offered a gentle smile. I told you lunch is on me. You earned it. Max gave a small nod, his eyes scanning the diner for a booth one as far from the window as possible. He wasn't used to being noticed, unless it was someone asking him to leave. Grant quietly followed as Max led Eli toward a booth, helping his little brother climb onto the leather seat. A waitress in a red apron appeared with menus, but Grant gently waved her off. 3 hot chocolates to start, he said, and bring them pancakes, eggs, bacon, the works. The waitress blinked at the scruffy kids beside him, but without saying anything, she nodded and left. Grant noticed Max glance at her name tag, as if reading a story that didn't include him. Eli sat silently, eyes locked on the sugar packets on the table, his tiny fingers still curled tightly around Max's sleeve. You've been looking after him a long time, huh? Grant asked. Max shrugged. Since our aunt threw us out. I tried sticking around her building for a while, but she threatened to call the cops. Said we were stealing food. Grant's jaw tightened. She your mom's sister? Yeah, Max replied. Eli sneezed softly, and Max immediately reached into his backpack, pulling out a wrinkled tissue. He dabbed Eli's nose with practiced care and instinct, not a chore. The hot chocolates arrived. Eli's face lit up as he sipped carefully. It's warm, he whispered, smiling through a mustache of melted chocolate. Max looked at him and grinned. Not too hot? Just a little. It was the first flicker of peace Grant had seen on Max's face. When the food came, it filled the table enough for 5 people. Pancakes stacked high, eggs fluffy, sausages piled next to crisp bacon. Eli gasped, eyes wide. Max looked stunned. "Are you sure?" Max asked again. "You didn't take a dime from me when I tried to pay you," Grant replied, unfolding his napkin. "This is the least I can do." Grant stirred his coffee, his mind spinning. He'd built empires, closed billion-dollar deals, stood in glass towers overlooking cities. But nothing in those boardrooms ever made him feel as exposed, as raw as watching Eli lick syrup from his fingers like it was treasure. "Is it okay if he eats with his hands?" Max asked quietly. Not looking up, Grant blinked out of his thoughts. "Of course," he said. "He can eat however he wants." Max gave a small nod and returned to his food. His plate was only half as full as his brother's. Max had insisted. "Eli, eat first." Grant had tried to order more, had offered, but Max declined. "We're used to rationing," he said with a tone number 12-year-old should carry. Grant sat back, silently watching the two boys eat. Eli hummed a little tune as he chewed, while Max smiled softly and wiped syrup from his chin, folding the napkin like it was a prized possession. That quiet care cracked something inside Grant, the numb grief he'd lived with since Hannah died. Twisted, reshaped by guilt. Not just sadness now, but shame. "Can I ask you something?" Grant's voice came out lower than usual. Uncertain. Max looked up. "Sure. That backpack you carry, what's in it?" Max wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Tools. Snacks when we have 'em. A blanket for Eli. Some duct tape. A screwdriver. Stuff like that. No toys?" Grant asked gently. Max let out a short, embarrassed laugh. "Ellie had a toy truck. One of the wheels broke last month. I was gonna fix it, but we lost it when we had to move." Grant leaned in slightly. "Move from where?" Max's eyes dropped. "To the table. Behind the train station. They put up fences. Said we were ruining the view for the tourists." He swallowed hard. "No one tried to help?" Grant asked. Max shrugged. "No one really cared." Grant leaned back against the booth, the old leather creaking. His gaze drifted past the boys, past the fog on the diner's window, and landed on a memory. 5 years ago. Him and Hannah arguing in their kitchen. She was pacing in slippers, holding a bunch of shelter photos. Children with eyes too hollow, mouths too quiet. "You don't see them," she had snapped. "They're invisible to you. You throw money at stocks, but what about throwing it at a child's life?" He'd brushed her off. "There are 1,000 foundations already, Hannah. What difference does one more make?" She had looked at him, eyes stinging. "It makes a difference to one child." "That's enough." He hadn't replied. Just grabbed his phone and walked out to another meeting. That was the last real fight they ever had. She died 6 months later, and Grant buried himself in stone and spreadsheets. Until the day his watch stopped ticking. Until Max showed up. His throat tightened as he looked back at the boy, now gently brushing syrup from Eli's cheek. "You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to survive every single day?" Grant asked. Max blinked. "Like, if we were rich?" "No," Grant replied. "Just safe." Max stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, "I'd go to school. A real one. I used to read manuals at the library, back when we had a place." He paused. "I want to build stuff. Fix things. Not just watches. Machines, drones, maybe even time machines." Grant smiled softly. "Time machines, huh?" Max's voice turned wistful. "So I could go back, save my mom, or tell her not to trust people, or stop her from getting sick." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, emotional, and unspoken. Eli had fallen asleep again, one hand curled around a half-eaten pancake. Max tucked the hoodie under his head like a pillow, gently brushing aside his bangs. Grant reached into his coat and pulled out an old brochure. Hannah's foundation. The one he'd never shut down. It had gathered dust in a drawer for over a year. "I used to think I didn't have time for this," he said. I told myself there were bigger problems, more urgent needs. Max tilted his head. And now? Grant looked at him. Then at Eli. Now I realize, he said quietly. This was the only thing that ever mattered. He folded the brochure and slid it across the table. I run a shelter, or I used to. It's still open. I just stopped paying attention. He met Max's cautious eyes. Would you let me take you and Eli there tonight? Max hesitated. We don't want pity. You won't get pity, Grant replied. You'll get warmth, food, safety, and if you're willing, I want to help you go to school, really go, and I'd like to fix that truck. Max studied him, face unreadable. Grant didn't rush him. Finally, Max nodded. Okay, he said, but only if I still get to fix things. I don't want to stop working. I just don't want to be scared anymore. Grant reached across the table and extended his hand. Deal. Max shook it, his grip strong for a 12-year-old. Deal. In that moment, a broken man and a burdened boy made something more lasting than any business deal. They formed a promise, not written in contracts or signed in ink, but made in faith. In time, ticking again, the sun dipped low behind the Chicago skyline, stretching long golden shadows across the streets. Grant Whitaker opened the door of his black SUV, guiding Max and Eli inside. Eli, just 4, clung to Max's hand. His small feet dangled above the floor, hoodie slipping off one shoulder to reveal bruises that told stories no child should live. Grant said little during the drive. His grip on the steering wheel was tight. Thoughts spiraled shame, anger, and something new. Purpose. Max sat in silence too, glancing from the man beside him to the city outside. He didn't understand why a stranger with a broken watch had decided to care. People like Grant usually walked past them, but not tonight. By the time they arrived at the Whitaker Children's Shelter, a 3-story building softly lit in twilight, Eli had fallen asleep. Grant parked in front, his throat tight. He had once poured millions into building that shelter in Hannah's memory. But after she died, he had shut his heart off from it. It became just another name in a folder. Until now. We're here, Grant said softly. Max looked up at the shelter building, blinking in disbelief. This belongs to you? Grant nodded. It was my wife's dream. I'm ashamed to admit I never truly honored it. Maybe that starts to change now. He stepped down and helped Max carry Eli, who stirred just enough to nuzzle into his brother's chest before falling back asleep. Inside, the warmth of the shelter wrapped around them like a memory long forgotten. The receptionist, startled to see the founder walk through the front doors, straightened immediately. Mr. Whitaker? She asked in shock. I need a room for these boys, Grant said firmly. Tonight. Full care. Everything. Yes, of course. Right away. Nurses and staff moved quickly. A kind-eyed woman gently reached for Eli, but he whimpered and clung tighter to Max. It's okay, buddy, Max whispered, voice trembling. They just want to help you. Eli hesitated, then allowed himself to be taken. His eyes never left Max's until he vanished down the hallway. Max's shoulders sagged, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world and was finally able to set it down. Grant stayed close, watching the boy with the kind of reverence one might show a soldier returning from battle. To him, Max was exactly that, just 10 years old, and already waging wars no child should face. As a nurse checked Max's vitals and handed him fresh clothes, Grant stepped aside, walking over to a window down the hall. His reflection stared back at him, gray at the temples, deep lines across his forehead, eyes worn from too many sleepless nights. He remembered the night Hannah passed, the hospital lights, the antiseptic air, the last brush of her hand against his dog she had pleaded with. Him in her final breath. Promise me you'll keep building the foundation for kids who fall through the cracks. Don't let them disappear. He had broken that promise until now. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Sir?" Max stood behind him in clean jeans and a fresh hoodie, his damp hair brushed back. He looked smaller without the layers of grime and cold, but those eyes, those fierce, resilient eyes, were unchanged. "Can I see Eli before I go to bed?" the boy asked. Grant turned to him. "Of course. He's in the nursery wing. Come on." They walked quietly down the dim corridor. Max peeked into the room and found Eli fast asleep on a small cot, tucked under clean white sheets. A stuffed bear nestled under his arm, likely a gift from the staff. His tiny chest rose and fell with the soft hum of the white noise machine. In the corner, Max stepped inside, knelt beside him, and brushed a stray curl from his brother's forehead. "You're safe now," he whispered, so gently that Grant almost missed it. "I promise." Grant stood at the doorway, his chest tightening. There. It was again something he still couldn't name. Not guilt. Not pity. Something deeper. He was watching a child become protector. A man forged too soon by the flames of hardship. "Max," Grant said softly, breaking the silence. "You're not going back out there. I won't let that happen." Max turned to him, guarded. "Are you saying we can stay?" "You can stay," Grant confirmed. "As long as you need. And more than that, I want to help you build something for kids like you and Eli. Not just a bed or a warm meal, but a future." Max's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes turned glassy, flickering between his sleeping brother and the man in front of him. "People say things like that a lot," he murmured. "Then they vanish." Grant stepped forward. "I've vanished long enough, Max. I won't again." The silence hung heavy, like quiet snowfall. Then Max nodded, slowly. Once, that single nod held more weight than any contract Grant had ever signed. Trust like his wasn't handed out. It had to be earned. Tonight, it had been later. Grant sat alone in the shelter kitchen, nursing a cup of lukewarm decaf coffee. He stared at the table, remembering the IPOs, the mergers, the pursuit of wealth. None of it compared to what had just happened. A child with nothing had given him more than he ever imagined. Clarity. Suddenly, his assistant Eleanor called. "Sir, I've reviewed the shelter's old files. I think we can do more, expand the education programs, add more staff, bring in trauma counselors." "Do it," Grant interrupted. "All of it. And Eleanor, one more thing." "Yes, sir?" "Change the name. It's not just the Whitaker shelter anymore." There was a pause. "What would you like to call it?" "Hannah's Hands," he said. Eleanor's voice softened. "That's beautiful." "No," Grant whispered, barely above a breath. "That's redemption." He hung up and glanced down the hallway where Max and Eli were now sleeping. And for the first time in years, the ticking of his watch matched the rhythm of a heart beginning to heal. Not loud, not sudden, but steady. In that quiet moment, Grant Whitaker finally understood. He hadn't saved them. They had saved him. The wind stirred through the tall oaks lining the driveway of Grant's estate, but the silence that once haunted the house was gone. For a year since Hannah's death, the mansion had been locked in grief. Each room, though beautiful and rich with history, felt like a shrine, cold, untouched, echoing with absence. But something had shifted. From the West Wing's terrace doors, the distant sound of footsteps echoed, small, uneven, and laughter, the kind of joy that used to fill these halls. Grant stood on the second-floor landing, one hand resting on the polished oak rail, the other holding a warm mug of tea. Downstairs, a small figure appeared. Max, the same boy who had fixed his watch and his heart in a bus terminal. Trailing just behind him was Eli, holding onto his brother's hand with both of his own. The 4-year-old's feet padded clumsily across the tile, one shoe slightly too big, his curls bouncing with every step. Grant hadn't even noticed he was smiling until His cheeks ached. Max spotted him and waved. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker." Grant walked down the steps slowly. "You can call me Grant now," he said, voice warmer than the tea he held. "Okay, Grant," Max said, trying the name with a small smile. Eli peeked out from behind his brother and offered a shy wave. "You boys settle in all right?" Grant asked as he reached the bottom step. Max nodded. "Better than all right. It's warm. We've got beds." Eli slept through the night, didn't wake up scared even once. He looked at his little brother with something fierce in his eyes, more than love. Protection. Eli, clutching a small wooden truck one of the housekeepers had given him, held it up proudly. "Look, it's got wheels," he announced, eyes bright. With joy. Grant knelt to his level. "I see that. Fast wheels too, Eli nodded seriously, then took off down the hallway, the truck clattering over polished floors. Max didn't chase him. He just smiled. "You know," Grant said, standing beside him again, "this house hasn't heard laughter in a long time." Max glanced around. "It's so big. Do you ever get lost in it?" "I used to," Grant said quietly. "After Hannah died, I didn't even want to be here." Max shifted his weight, uncertain. "I'm sorry." Grant rested a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Don't be. You reminded me what it feels like to care again. That's not something to be sorry for." They walked toward the breakfast room, where the table had already been set. Grant had instructed the staff not to hover, not to dress like servants, and not to ask questions. Max and Eli weren't guests anymore. They were part of this home now. Grant watched as Max carefully buttered a slice of toast for his little brother, cutting off the crusts just the way Eli liked it. The boy swung his legs under the chair, humming as he ate, occasionally pausing to make engine noises with his toy truck. The billionaire couldn't tear his eyes away. Two brothers, one of them barely more than a child himself, looking after each other without complaint, without asking for anything in return. It softened something in Grant that had been frozen solid for over a year. "Do you miss your mom?" Grant asked gently. Max didn't hesitate. "Every day. But I think I miss being a kid even more." Those words hit harder than any failed business deal, harder than any market crash. Grant stared at him. "What do you mean?" Max looked up, that same calm steadiness he had shown while fixing the watch still glowing in his eyes. "I had to stop being a kid the day Eli was born. I was 8. Our mom got really sick. I learned how to warm bottles, rock him to sleep, clean up after him, before I even learned fractions." Grant stayed silent for a moment. Then he said, "You've done a better job than most grown men I've met." Max shrugged. "I just didn't want him to feel alone." Grant turned away quickly, hiding the tears rising in his eyes. He remembered hearing almost the exact same words from Hannah when they first started the foundation. She had once told him, "No child should ever feel alone in the world. If we can help even one, it's worth it." Now, that vision lived on in Max and Eli. Later that day, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the music room, Max and Eli explored the mansion freely. Eli squealed with delight when he discovered a hidden staircase that looped back into the library. Max found a small workshop in the back garage filled with clocks, gears, and old parts Grant had once tinkered with before grief had pushed it all aside. His fingers itched to start fixing something. Grant found him there, crouched in front of an old cuckoo clock. "This one still has a shot," Max said, eyes gleaming. "You think so?" Max nodded. "It's not broken. Just waiting for someone to fix it," Grant chuckled. "That's what people used to say about me." Max grinned. "Well, looks like you're ticking again, too." That night, Grant asked Max a question, serious and careful. "If I wanted to adopt you and Eli, would that be all right with you?" Max froze. "Adopt? You'd be my sons, officially. This would be your home. Not just for now, but always. Max's expression hardened, a reflex born from too many broken promises. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, Grant said quietly. I don't want you here out of guilt. I want you here because you belong. Max didn't respond. Instead, he got up and walked out of the room. Grant's heart sank. Maybe he had pushed too far, too fast, but a few minutes later, Max returned with Eli in his arms, already half asleep. He's been asking me if we'll be split up again, Max said. If we can stay together. He paused, swallowing hard. Then yes, I want that. We both do. Grant stepped forward and wrapped them both into a hug. It was awkward. Max stiffened at first, unsure, but Eli melted into the embrace immediately, his tiny hands resting on Grant's back. Slowly, Max's shoulders relaxed too. The next morning, the Whitaker mansion felt entirely different. The silence hadn't vanished, but it had been replaced by something better warmth that breathed. Toys lay scattered in the hall. Tiny socks appeared on the staircase. A long-forgotten clock chimed for the first time in years. And outside, two boys played hide-and-seek in the garden, their laughter echoing across the lawn. Grant stood at the front window, watching the sun rise. The mansion, once a shrine of loss, had become a home again. That same morning, the air in downtown Chicago felt different. A little less rushed, a little less cold. Or maybe it was just Grant Whitaker's perspective. For the first time in over a year, the weight that usually crushed his chest each morning felt a little lighter. The courtroom sat on the top floor of a red-bricked municipal building, where soft sunlight shone through dusty windows and painted warm streaks across wooden benches and polished marble floors. Grant wore a dark gray suit, neatly pressed, but his usually steady hands rested on his thighs, fingers twitching slightly. Across the room, sitting on a bench too large for his small frame, was Max, the 12-year-old who had unknowingly repaired the broken pieces of Grant's heart. Beside him, clutching his hand tightly, was Eli, 4 years old, sandy-haired, wide-eyed. Wearing a scuffed blue jacket 2 sizes too big. Eli sat quietly, chewing nervously on his sleeve, his feet not quite reaching the floor. Every so often, he looked up at Max, who responded with a small squeeze and a whispered, "It's okay. We're okay." For a long time, Max had never believed they'd really be okay. They'd wandered the streets for months after their aunt slammed the door on them that bitter March morning. Max had become more than a brother. He had become Eli's protector, his parent, his shield. He made sure Eli ate before he did. He found the dry spots under bridges. He kept people from getting too close while they slept. Fixing broken things, radios, watches, zippers, had bought them enough to scrape by. But through it all, Max never begged. Whether it was pride or the last ember of dignity, he held firm until Grant. That accidental meeting at the bus terminal had been like sunlight through storm clouds. Max hadn't trusted it at first. People often offered help and then disappeared. But Grant hadn't disappeared. He returned again and again, with food, warmth, patience, and finally, a promise. Someday, he had said, "If you're okay with it, maybe I could be more than just a friend." Max had blinked hard. Adults didn't usually stay. Now, seated on a wooden bench in a courtroom filled with echoing steps and briefcases, Max struggled to believe it was real. He glanced down at Eli, who was now playing with a toy car Grant had given him, a scratched blue Mustang with fading decals. Grant had found it at a flea market. "Reminded me of my own childhood," he'd said. The courtroom door creaked open. A tall woman in black robes entered, Judge Kimberly Ross. Her eyes briefly landed on Max and Eli before softening. She gave Grant a nod and motioned for everyone to be seated. Grant stood. His attorney, a composed woman named Valerie Pierce, gave a nod of reassurance. Max's heart pounded. He didn't know why. maybe fear, or maybe hope that felt too big. Mr. Whitaker, Judge Ross began, adjusting her glasses, you filed for full legal guardianship and adoption of Max. And Eli Carter, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Grant replied, his voice calm but sincere. And you understand the responsibilities, both financial and emotional, of becoming the legal parent of 2 minors? I do, Grant said without hesitation. And I welcome them. The judge nodded, flipping through her file. Your background is clear. Your home passed inspection. The boys have been in your temporary care for 3 months. She turned her gaze to Max. Double quotes Max. How are you feeling today? Max's voice cracked slightly. Okay, a little nervous. That's an honest answer, she said kindly. May I ask, do you want to live with Mr. Whitaker? You don't have to answer if you're unsure. Max glanced at Grant, those steady eyes, that kind smile he always wore for Eli. Then he looked at his brother. I do, ma'am, Max said. He's the only adult who's ever kept a promise. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was fulfilled with everything that couldn't be spoken. And Eli, Grant, knelt beside the bench. Eli, he said softly, do you want to keep living at my house with your own bed and pancakes in the morning? Eli looked up. With waffles too, Grant smiled. Definitely waffles. Eli nodded with excitement. Then yes. Judge Ross laughed gently. That's the best answer I've heard all week. She turned the last page in her folder and looked up, face serious again. In my years on this bench, I've seen too many cases of loss and abandonment. These boys have endured more than most ever should. But today, we begin a new chapter. She reached for the gavel. It is the ruling of this court that Grant Whitaker is granted full legal and physical custody of Max and Eli Carter, now to be known as Max Whitaker and Eli Whitaker, effective immediately. Bang! The sound echoed like a bell marking the end of a storm. Max swallowed hard, his eyes blurring with emotion. He turned to Eli, who had dropped his toy car in shock. We're really staying? Eli asked, and Max nodded. Yeah, buddy. We're not going anywhere. Grant stood nearby, arms slightly open, but he didn't rush toward them. He waited. Max stood up first, then helped Eli down. The little boy wrapped his arms tightly around Grant's leg, pressing his face into the fabric of his slacks. Max followed more cautiously until Grant reached down and pulled him gently into a full hug. It was warm, honest, and safe. The kind of embrace he hadn't felt since he was 5 years old. They left the courthouse an hour later, carrying new documents, new last names, and a new chapter ready to begin. Outside, photographers waited, their cameras flashing as they recognized Grant Whitaker, the elusive billionaire tech mogul who had vanished from public view nearly a year ago. But Grant didn't wave. He didn't even look at the press. He was too focused on buckling Eli into the car seat and making sure Max had enough snacks for the ride home. That evening, back at their home in Lincoln Park, Max wandered into the study where Grant sat reading. He hesitated in the doorway. Grant? Grant looked up. Hey, kiddo, can't sleep? I jest. I wanted to say thank you. You don't have to, Grant replied. I know, but I want to. Grant set his book aside. Come here. Max walked over and sat next to him on the couch. You know, Grant said, people think I adopted you because I wanted to give you something. But the truth is, you gave me something first. Max tilted his head. What did I give you? You reminded me that time still matters. Max smiled faintly. I guess fixing your watch really did something, huh? Grant chuckled. You fixed more than that. They sat in silence for a while until Grant spoke again. Tomorrow. We make waffles. Max grinned. Can I help? You'd better. Outside, the city buzzed along, unaware that high inside one of its towers, A broken man and two boys who had once been forgotten were now a family. Applause echoed through the old community center, newly renovated and renamed the Hannah's Hands Foundation, in memory of the woman who had once pleaded with her husband to help children like the one sitting in the audience. Max stood nervously on a small wooden stage, clutching the hand of his 4-year-old brother Eli, who clung close. Like a shadow, Grant Whitaker, dressed in a modest gray suit instead of his usual custom-tailored attire, stood behind the podium. His voice, though steady, carried a soft tremble. "I never thought a broken watch would bring me here," Grant began, scanning the room filled with reporters, donors, and most importantly, children. "But it did, because that watch led me to someone who reminded me what truly matters. Someone who didn't ask for help but deserved it more than anyone I've ever met." He turned slightly and placed a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. "This is Max. He's 12. He lived on the streets. He protected his little brother when nobody else would. And when I met him, he didn't ask me for anything. He just wanted to fix something that meant something to someone else." The crowd murmured as camera shutters clicked and quiet gasps rippled through the room. Max wasn't sure where to look. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. The lights felt too odd, the air too thick, and the moment too big for a boy who used to sleep behind dumpsters with a hoodie for a pillow. But then he looked down at Eli's wide, trusting eyes and steadied himself. Grant smiled at him. "Today, I'm proud to announce that Max will serve as our honorary youth ambassador. He will be the face of this mission, because no one understands these streets better than someone who's walked them." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Max barely noticed the sound. He was still trying to absorb what had just happened. He'd been called many things: vagrant, thief, trouble, even ghost by those who refused to see him. But today, he was called Ambassador Dodd after the ceremony. Backstage, Grant knelt beside the boys. Max still gripped the small plaque they had given him. "You okay?" Grant asked. Max nodded slowly, then glanced at his brother. I don't want it to be fake. You know?" Grant's brow softened. "Fake?" Max lowered his voice. "Like something that sounds good, but nobody really helps. There are still kids out there, sleeping in alleys. Some younger than Eli. I see them every night. They don't have speeches or donors or cameras." Grant nodded solemnly. "Then let's go find them." Over the next 2 weeks, the Hannah's Hands Foundation launched a quiet but powerful outreach effort. No press releases. No headlines. Just Max, Eli, and a small team of hand-picked social workers driving through Chicago's forgotten corners. They asked questions no one else bothered to ask. "Are you hungry? Are you okay? Do you want help?" Max led the way. He remembered which back lots held the cardboard shelters. He knew the stairwells that stayed dry when it rained. He knew which kids were more afraid of shelters than sleeping on the ground, because some places were worse than nothing. "Hey, that boy with the limp, his name's Tyler," Max said one night as their van pulled up near an alley. "He shares food with that girl by the fence. Her name's Faith. She doesn't talk much, but she trusts him." By the end of the first month, they had brought in 17 children. Each was met with warm food, soft blankets, and people who listened. Some cried nonstop. Some slept for days. A few ran. But most came back because for the first time, nobody wanted anything from them. Grant would often sit in the lounge at night, watching Max talk to the new kids. He saw how the boy crouched down to meet their eyes, how he listened, really listened. Max didn't tell them what to do. He simply said, "I was there too, and I made it out. You can too." One evening after dinner, Max sat with Eli on the rooftop garden Grant had built just for them. The city buzzed below, but up there, everything was still. Eli held a half-eaten cookie in one hand and his favorite dinosaur plush in the other. He looked up suddenly. Are we rich now? Max chuckled softly. No, buddy. Not rich. Just safe. Eli nodded with complete seriousness. Safe is better than rich. Max turned to the skyline. Yeah, it really is. The story of Max's new role eventually spread. Even though Grant hadn't planned on any publicity, a local paper ran a story titled From Street Corner to Foundation Voice. The boy who repaired a watch now repairs lives. Soon, calls came in from other cities, other donors, even other billionaires. But Grant made sure the mission soul never got buried under the headlines. Every decision had to pass through Max's perspective. No polished shelters, Max insisted. They need people, not programs. One rainy afternoon, a young social worker named Carla burst into Grant's office. You need to come see this. She led him to the intake room. Standing there, soaked and shaking, were 4 children, muddy, frightened, and barely clothed. Behind them stood Max, completely drenched, holding an umbrella. They were hiding near the train yard, Max explained. One of the girls had a fever. I couldn't just leave them. Grant looked at the 4 small faces, then back at Max. How did you convince them to come? Max shrugged. I didn't. I just promised I wouldn't leave them alone. That night, 2 of the children slept in Max's room. Eli gave up his bed and curled up beside Max on the couch. They needed it more, he murmured, already drifting off. 3 months later, the number of children brought in reached 53. Some called it a miracle. Grant called it redemption. And Max? Max simply said, just doing what my brother would have done for me if he were older. One morning, Max was invited to speak at a private school that was fundraising for Hannah's hands. Wearing a donated dress shirt and polished second-hand shoes, he stood in front of a gym full of students who had never known what it meant to go hungry. He didn't deliver a rehearsed speech. He just said, I'm not special. I just got lucky. Someone saw me. Someone cared. I hope one day you'll be that someone for someone else. When he stepped off the stage, the entire gym rose, not because he was a hero, but because he reminded them of what kindness really looked like. That evening, Max sat beside Grant on the back porch of the foundation, watching the sky turn orange. Do you think Mom would be proud of us? Max asked softly, and Grant turned to him. I think she's smiling, he said. Every time you help another kid, it's like you're giving her one more reason to rest in peace. Max glanced over at Eli, who was sound asleep inside a side. Blanket fort nearby, a faint smile still on his face, even in his dreams. And for the first time since losing their mother, Max felt something new and unfamiliar peace. Because the boy who once repaired a broken watch was now mending broken childhoods, one heartbeat at a time. The afternoon sun spilled through the wide windows of the Whitaker Foundation headquarters, casting golden light on the polished floors and tall glass walls. Grant Whitaker stood still in the foyer, arms loosely crossed, watching through the glass as a group of children played on the newly trimmed lawn outside. Among them was a boy he could never forget, Max, now taller, stronger, and carrying something Grant had once feared was gone forever. Hope. It had been 3 years since that cold morning at the Chicago bus terminal, when a 12-year-old boy with grease-streaked fingers and a broken watch had unknowingly fixed something far more important than time. That day, Max came not just with a sharp eye and steady hands, but with a 4-year-old brother clinging to his side. Eli, curious and quiet, had looked up at Grant with those wide, searching eyes and held onto his coat, as if sensing that maybe, just maybe, this man might be someone who wouldn't leave. Grant still remembered that grip. Back then, Max had no reason to trust anyone. Life on the streets had hardened him. He had taken on the role of protector for Eli without hesitation, feeding him scraps, shielding him from danger, and comforting him with quiet stories under bridges and in alleyways. Later, Grant would understand it was Eli who gave Max purpose, just as Max gave Grant redemption. Once, Grant had been a man ruled by time, profit, and performance. But when Hannah died, all that structure dissolved into static. The ticking of clocks turned meaningless. His days blurred together, filled with hollow meetings and empty rooms. The watch she had given him, once a symbol of love, became nothing but a painful reminder of what he'd lost until Max. He remembered the exact moment the second hand started ticking again. When Max handed the watch back, it sounded soft but sure, like a heartbeat returning after being still. But the true miracle wasn't the repaired mechanism. It was Max's choice to be honest, even when no one was watching. That kind of integrity couldn't be taught or bought. It had to be lived. And today, Max was living it. "Mr. Whitaker?" A gentle voice called. It was Eleanor, his longtime assistant and now executive director of the Hannah's Hands Foundation, renamed in honor of Grant's late wife. "The keynote starts in 20 minutes. Are you ready?" Grant nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the window. "I want Max to speak first," he said. "He's earned that stage more than I ever could." Eleanor smiled warmly. "He's rehearsed. It's 6 times. He's nervous but ready." Grant chuckled softly. "He's come a long way from screwdrivers in his pocket and patched up sneakers." Together they walked toward the event hall, where donors, volunteers, and families from across the country had gathered to celebrate the Foundation's expanded mission, not just shelter and meals, but trades, mentorship, education, and real healing for children who had been abandoned or abused. Tonight's spotlight wasn't just on Max. It was on every kid like him who never had a voice until someone finally chose to listen. Backstage, Max stood in a plain blazer and khakis, his hair neatly combed, a small gear-shaped pin on his lapel, the P, new emblem of the Foundation. He looked up as Grant entered and offered a shy smile. "You're still wearing it," Max said, nodding to Grant's wrist. Grant raised his arm. "Of course. Still ticking." He paused, then added, "Even better than before." Max laughed softly, but his eyes drifted to the far end of the stage, where Eli, now 7, sat proudly beside Eleanor, wearing his brother's old baseball cap and swinging his legs beneath the chair. "He still doesn't like sleeping alone," Max said, his voice quieter now. "Even here. So I read to him every night, like I did back when it was just the 2 of us." Grant felt something tug at his chest. "He's lucky to have you," he said, "and so am I." The curtain rose slowly, and Max stepped onto the stage, carefully adjusting the microphone. The crowd hushed. Grant sat in the front row, eyes locked on him. Max took a deep breath. "When I was 12, he began, voice even and steady, "I could fix anything. Radios, watches, even old phones, but I couldn't fix being hungry. I couldn't fix being scared. I couldn't fix having no home." He paused and looked toward Eli, who flashed him a double thumbs up. "But I could fix a watch. One day, I repaired a watch for a man at a bus station. What I didn't know was that I fixed something else, his heart. He told me that. And then, he fixed mine." The room remained silent, hanging on his words. 3 years ago, I thought my life would always be the same cold mornings, counting coins, protecting my brother from a world that didn't care. But now, I know, we weren't invisible. We were just waiting for someone to see us. He motioned toward Grant. "Because of Mr. Whitaker and the Hannah's Hands Foundation, I have a home. Eli has a school. I have mentors who taught me how to do more than survive. I'm learning how to build, how to lead. I want to study mechanical engineering. Someday, I want to open a repair shop and teach kids like me how to create something that lasts, something that ticks." The final words landed with weight and warmth, like a quiet heartbeat. The audience erupted in applause, raw and loud. Grant stood, clapping, his eyes glassy. Max stepped down from the stage, and before he could reach his seat, Eli ran down the aisle and leapt into his arms. Grant turned slightly, wiping away tears. Later that night, Grant joined Max and Eli in their modest apartment on the Foundations campus. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching a toy airplane Grant had given him a year earlier. "Do you ever miss it?" Grant asked, pouring 2 mugs of tea. "The way things used to be?" Max shook his head. "I miss Mom sometimes," he said. "But not the fear, not the cold. I'm not afraid anymore." Grant studied him quietly. "You know, I always thought I saved you. But now I see it was the other way around." Max smiled, not humbly, but with honest truth. "We saved each other." Grant sat beside him. The wall clock ticked gently in the background. The room was quiet, warm, and full of peace. Tomorrow they would welcome more kids. Tomorrow, Max would help guide new families through the Foundations program. He had become more than just a student. He was a symbol. And Eli would grow up in a world where his dreams weren't laughed at, where his bedtime stories weren't whispered on the streets, and where the people he looked up to actually lived. With him, Grant leaned back and closed his eyes, listening to the soft ticking of the clock. It wasn't just time that was moving forward anymore. It was all of them. Together. We'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Let us know where you're watching from too. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. If this one touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking the end screen now.